Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today in Vlachim in the Czech Republic, visiting S&B, Cellular and Belot, one of the biggest ammunition manufacturers in the world, which has a pretty cool reference collection. And we're taking a look at some of the cool guns out of that collection. And today we have a pair of Cuban FALs. These are pretty rare today, as you might suspect. Now, the FAL shows up on the world stage in 1954, and it's actually Venezuela that's the first country to formally adopt and purchase it, followed very quickly by Belgium. So 1954 are the first contracts. By 1957, 1958, there are a lot of countries around the world that are starting to jump on this FAL bandwagon, and Cuba would join them in 1958. So at that point, it was still under the control of Batista. He orders 35,000 FALs, a combination of both the standard rifles and the heavy barrel light machine guns. And as a quick aside here, it may seem a little confusing that this is officially called the FAL, and this is the FALO. Well, the reason is the abbreviations for the gun. FAL stands for Fusil Automatique Léger, or light automatic rifle. The word for heavy and the word for light in French, which is what the Belgians are using, they both start with L. So for the Fusil Automatique Lourd, or heavy automatic rifle, they just tack on the extra O. So it's FALO. Anyway, that's where the names come from. Batista orders 35,000 of these in 58, but at the end of 58, he flees Cuba, and the country falls into the hands of the communist rebels under the leadership of Fidel Castro. Now, it's funny how many guns Batista was ordering that show up after he's left. AR-10s are like this as well. But FALs start arriving, and FN talks to Castro, and Castro decides he does want these, makes payment for them, and in 1959, a total of 3 shipments arrive. The first one in June, the last one in December, and they account for about 12,500 regular FAL rifles and 510 of the heavy-barreled guns. Now, there is a 4th ship that arrives in March of 1960, and this is the most notable of them because it pulls into Havana Harbor, they start unloading it, and then it just explodes. And there isn't really an official explanation for why it just exploded in Havana Harbor. Castro, not surprisingly, blamed the CIA, and he might not be wrong on there. The problem, by the way, was compounded by the fact that there were actually 2 explosions. The ship was carrying munitions, and so presumably someone probably sabotaged it, and then that first explosion led to a second explosion something like a half an hour later. So a whole lot of people had run to the scene to assist and help out and rescue survivors, and then there was a second explosion, and that killed a whole bunch of people. It was total a couple hundred casualties of the event. Not good. At any rate, that was the end of FALs arriving in Cuba. By 1960 or so, the Cubans would start getting small arms from the Soviet Union and from Czechoslovakia. Anyway, let's take a closer look at these two, and let me show you what specifically identifies a Cuban FAL. National crests aren't really a big thing today, but back in the 50s and 60s and earlier, they definitely were. And what better way to identify the nationality of your rifles than by sticking a big national crest on them? So here we have a Cuban crest and Ejército de Cuba, or Cuban Army, right on the side of the gun. FN, like Mauser before them, and like a bunch of other companies, was quite happy to do this sort of custom marking on contracts for various national customers. So you'll see, this is typically where you will see national markings on FALs. You just don't normally see Cuban ones. The rest of the markings here are pretty standard. We have FN's marking Fabrique Nationale, Dame de Guerre, Estal Belgique. And then on the other side, FAL, caliber 7.62, and the serial number on both the upper and the lower. It is not clear to me exactly what sort of order these rifles arrived in. There were multiple shipments, as I said, from Belgium. This one's a higher serial number than the total that were delivered, but I don't think that necessarily indicates anything in particular. In terms of features, the Cuban FALs have all basically the very early set of features. So we have a first type upper receiver here. They would later go on to make a couple of revisions to strengthen this. They would add a strengthening rib back here in 1960 or 1961. Of course, that's a couple years after this contract. They would then just increase the size of this whole rear end of the receiver later on. We have the early style of disassembly lever. So this just pulls back the lock and catch and allows the rifle to pivot open. What they discovered with this is that over time, when it wore, it could actually become loose and let the gun open. So they changed it to a horizontal latch that was more wear resistant later on. We have carry handles on the gun. Some customers wanted those, some didn't. We have the standard FAL rear aperture sight here. It goes from 200 out to 600 meters. This is not the very first version of FAL rear sight. With the contract for the German military in April of 1957, the sights were raised all of 3 millimeters to appease the Germans. So this is typically referred to as the tall version of the front sight, although it's not all that tall. Adjustable gas regulator. And we have sort of the American style of flash hider here. It does have a low profile bayonet lug. You can take a bayonet, but I don't have the bayonet here to show you. The FAL-O has mostly the same features. We've got the same Cuban crest. We've got actually the exact same sights, maybe a little unusual, unexpected for the light machine gun version of a standard rifle. We have a serial number there. This one is a nice low serial number, 1455. Although again, that's higher than the total number of FAL-Os that were received by the Cubans. Most of our differences are up here. So we've got a heavier carry handle. We've got a heavier front handguard. That's a nice chunky one. Early pattern of front handguard. Later on, they would shorten it to just this section. Same gas regulator. The gas plug is actually still adjustable to launch rifle grenades, should you want to. Whoop. That's how it disassembles, by the way. So A is for automatic, GR is for grenade. We have a rather larger flash hider out here, and this is where the bipod is supposed to be. This was the standard Belgian pattern of FAL-O that just had a regular-ish bipod. Some of the Commonwealth nations, when they did their heavy-barreled versions of the FAL, would do things like have the bipod double as the handguard. This pattern doesn't do that. It's just got a regular bipod, which is unfortunately missing from this example. And then one other feature that's sort of typical of light machine guns is we have a shoulder rest that can fold up there. That just allows you to put this on the shoulder, press down into it, and make the gun a little bit more controllable in full auto fire. And lastly, of course, the barrel is substantially heavier than that of the standard FAL. And the idea there is just to give it more capacity for sustained fire. So I showed you this with a 20-round magazine in it. It will take 20-round mags, but the standard magazine for the heavy barrel guns was actually a 30-rounder. Again, unfortunately, I don't have a 30-rounder here to show you. If I pull the handguards off here, you can very clearly see the difference in barrel profile. So the gas block assembly functions the same way, but it has to be a separate piece because it has to have a much larger journal to go around the heavier barrel. And the barrel's heavier all the way out to the muzzle, hence the requirement for the heavier flash hider. Note that the standard FAL and the heavy barrel have exactly the same length barrel. They're 533 millimeter or roughly 21-inch long barrels. And in case you're curious, here is the Cuban heavy-barreled handguard. I guess I kind of spoiled my conclusion segment by already telling you like what happened with the full deliveries of these. So ultimately, Castro gets about 12,500 of the rifles, about 500 of the heavy-barreled squad automatic version. They're used in Cuba, but eventually, of course, Cuba replaces all of its small arms with Soviet caliber stuff. And so these start to be exported. They're supplied to friendly nations in need of military assistance. Some of them go to rebels in Venezuela. Some of them, a decent number of the ones that are exported are actually sanitized before export, where they'll take that Cuban Army crest on the receiver and just drill out a circle in the receiver to get rid of it. You see a similar sort of thing with South African FALs that are sent to Rhodesia, sanitized. Not an uncommon thing today. You know, we have serial number databases and you can look it up and be like, ah, that's clearly a Cuban FAL that showed up with no marking on it. Back in the day, in the 60s, it would have been a lot harder to try and track down the exact origin of a gun if the identifying mark like that were removed, especially a gun like the FAL that was supplied to dozens of different countries originally. So now, I've never actually fired a full auto FAL, which is a little surprising, but there it is. So we're going to take this one down to the shooting range here at S&B, and we're going to see what it's like to shoot. And I'm going to start with it in semi-auto and just see how that handles. Yeah, 308 has some kick to it. So, how bad of an idea is it to have full auto in a shoulder-fired FAL? Lean way into this one.